In the ancient world, Demeter was revered as the goddess of agriculture, of the seasons, and of life itself. She was the mother who gave birth to the world's harvests, the one whose heart beats in tune with the earth. But her life wasn't just about nurturing. No, Demeter was also a goddess of incredible power and resilience. Her story is not just one of love, but also of defiance. It is a story of a mother's fierce survival, of battling the very forces of nature and the gods themselves for what she loved most, her daughter. In her very name, Demeter carries the essence of her divine role. Theories about the etymology of Demeter trace its roots to the Proto-Indo-European words de, possibly derived from G, meaning earth, and meter, meaning mother. While some suggest her name signifies Earth Mother, a title befitting her connection to the land and its fertility, the prevailing theory identifies her as the Grain Mother, emphasizing her role as the nurturer of crops and the provider of sustenance. This interpretation reflects her central place in the ancient agricultural world, where she embodied the life-giving power of the harvest. Demeter's greatest challenge began when her daughter, Persephone, was abducted by Hades, the god of the underworld. This event plunged the earth into an unrelenting winter. No crops grew, and famine spread across the lands. The once fertile earth became barren, just as Demeter's heart became empty, aching for her missing child. For months, Demeter wandered the earth in search of Persephone. In her grief, the goddess began to wither. The immortal beauty she was known for faded. Her radiant form turned into that of an old woman, bent and tired from her sorrow. But despite this, her determination never wavered. Her pain gave her the strength to defy even the gods themselves. Meanwhile, Zeus, the king of the gods, watched with growing concern as the world fell into chaos. The mortals suffered, and their offerings to the gods had ceased, bringing about a crisis for Olympus itself. Without sacrifices, the gods would lose their strength, and Zeus feared the divine order was in jeopardy. Desperate to end the famine, Zeus begged Demeter to restore the earth. But Demeter's heart was resolute. Her grief was not something to be appeased. She refused to let the earth bear fruit until Persephone was returned. Zeus, knowing the fate of humanity rested in her hands, sent a series of gods to Demeter, each bringing offerings, gifts of abundance, wisdom, and power. But Demeter rejected them all. None of them could bring back Persephone, and that was all she cared for. Even when the gods themselves offered their help, her resolve remained firm. Finally, Zeus realized that only he could resolve the situation. He journeyed to the underworld, determined to bring Persephone back. But there, in the shadows of Hades' realm, a new twist awaited them. Persephone, while trapped in the underworld, had eaten 6 pomegranate seeds, sealing her fate. According to the laws of the dead, anyone who consumed food from the underworld would remain there, bound to it forever. Persephone could not be freed completely. She would have to remain in the underworld for 6 months of every year, during the cold winter months. Thus, the world was divided into 2 seasons: winter, when Persephone was in the underworld, and spring and summer, when she was reunited with Demeter. This was the birth of the seasonal cycle that mirrored the feminine cycle of life, death, and rebirth. In the end, it was a compromise. Demeter would see Persephone only half the year. But this balance brought life back to the earth. Spring returned, flowers bloomed, and crops flourished once again. But in the fall, as Persephone returned to the underworld, the world would fall into cold, barren stillness. However, there was more to Demeter's story than just her grief and her eventual reconciliation. For she was also a goddess of fierce independence and power, often having to fight against the overwhelming forces of the gods themselves. Demeter was not without her own entanglements with the gods. While she wasn't known for her lovers, the greatest among them were her brothers, Zeus and Poseidon. Both gods pursued her. Zeus even went so far as to transform himself into a bull in an attempt to forcefully seduce her. Later, he repented for his actions by castrating a ram and offering its mutilated parts to Demeter. While the act was grotesque, Demeter accepted his apology and months later gave birth to Persephone, the daughter who would change the world. Poseidon was a similar kind of lover. His pursuit of Demeter was just as forceful. In one version of their myth, Demeter, wishing to escape his advances, transformed into a mare to flee him. But Poseidon, ever persistent, transformed into a stallion and pursued her, eventually coupling with her. From this union came 2 children, a daughter called Despoina, whose name was forbidden to be spoken, and a magnificent winged horse named Arion. This episode, filled with passion and force, was not without consequence. Demeter was enraged by Poseidon's violation of her. Zeus, fearing her wrath, sent the nymphs to bathe her in the river Ladon, cleansing her of the anger and giving her the name Lucia, the goddess of purification. Though Demeter had faced the overwhelming persistence of gods, she endured. She showed us that even in the face of divine violation, she could reclaim her power. Despite the forceful advances of Zeus and Poseidon, Demeter was never a passive figure. She was a badass survivor, who survived the harshest winters, who could create life out of loss, and who could bring spring even after the most brutal of winters. But Demeter's story is not just one of sorrow. In her time of grief, she found solace in the kindness of mortals. When Demeter, transformed into an old woman by her suffering, sat on a rock near a well in Eleusis, she was discovered by the daughters of Helios and Metanera, who had gone to fetch water. The goddess, calling herself Deo, presented herself as a wanderer in need of work. The sisters, thinking she sought employment, invited her to the palace to care for their younger brother, Demephon. As the child's nurse, Demeter used her divine powers to anoint him with ambrosia, strengthening him and beginning a ritual to make him immortal. However, when Metanera witnessed this, she panicked, fearing for her son's safety, and interrupted the divine process. Furious at the interruption, Demeter revealed her true form and declared that while Demephon would not achieve immortality, he would always be honored for having been in her care. To honor their hospitality, Demeter made a grand request, a temple in her name to be built in Eleusis. She promised to teach her sacred rites, known as the Eleusinian Mysteries, to the people. These mysteries, the most famous secret religious rites of ancient Greece, were said to offer initiates, mysti, insights into the cycle of life, death, and rebirth, and even the promise of immortality. What exactly the mysteries revealed remains a mystery to this day, as initiates were strictly forbidden from speaking of them. Scholars speculate that the final stages of the rituals involved visions of the afterlife, possibly induced by the use of psychedelic substances, connecting participants to divine truths about existence and the universe. Through her story, we see not just a mother's love, but also a woman's resilience. Demeter teaches us that we too can face the darkest times with strength and that, through love, we can create new life from pain. She is the goddess of cycles, of life, death, and rebirth, and most importantly, the goddess of survival. In the end, Demeter's legacy remains one of resilience, love, and independence. Even in the darkest times, when the earth is barren, her willpower can bring the spring. Her story reminds us that no force is stronger than a mother's love and that we too, in the face of loss, can find the strength to survive and bring forth the rebirth of the world.